We are joined by David Paterson, New York State's 55th governor and the chairman of the New York State Democratic Committee. Governor Paterson, welcome back to the program.
Good morning, Bob. How are you?
Pretty good. Where are you? Trinidad?
Not anymore. I'm back in New York City.
All right. Have you seen Bill de Blasio yet?
Not since I got back, but I see him from time to time.
Okay. All right. So tell us, you're back in the city. Tell us, what were you doing in Trinidad over the weekend, pray tell?
Well, I have a friend by the name of Keith Rowley, and he is a candidate for Prime Minister of Trinidad. The way you run for Prime Minister is they have 41, basically, national positions, kind of like the U.S. Senate here in the United States or something like that. And the party that wins the most of the 41 seats will elect their prime minister. So he's one of the two major candidates. The other is a sitting prime minister. And I've known him quite a while, and I have met with him in Brooklyn, where I was originally born, and is the largest congregation of Trinidadians outside of Trinidad in the world. So I went down to speak at their sort of national presentation of candidates, and it's amazing, Bob. You would never see anything like this in the United States. Trinidad has a population of 1.2 million people. They had 30 to 40,000 people at both of the major party rallies. Now, we would fight and kick and scratch and call all of our friends and try to get 5,000 people out to see a presidential candidate. 30 to 40,000 people. And it doesn't just happen once. There are 2 or 3 different events where they have these numbers. It's amazing participation.
Well, why is that? Why do you think there's so much interest in Trinidad, whereas around here, whether it's upstate New York or almost anywhere in the United States, there seems to be shall we say, a fair amount of indifference among most of the population? That it would take, I don't know, announcing you're going to give away 1 million iPads to get a crowd that big.
Yes. Well, I think that the political parties are more a part of the culture. So I notice at these rallies a lot of music, a lot of dance, a lot of the food. I mean, even their food choices are different. They wear different colors depending on which party you're in, and so I think it's more grassroots. It's more in sync with how people actually live than it might be here, and it's not all positive. I mean, we say some pretty nasty things about each other in politics here. You will not believe the level of negativity and just tearing down the individuals on the other side. I mean, I think in most contests where we are, at the end of the contest, the people can shake hands. I'm afraid that nationally we're kind of going in the same direction, and I don't think that's particularly a great thing.
So it sounds as though politics in Trinidad may be more on par with, say, the UFC as opposed to just kind of tea and crumpets. I mean, it sounds like they take their elections and their campaigns perhaps a lot more seriously, or at least they're more inclined to be vocal about issues and the candidates than maybe in the United States.
Exactly.
Now, you managed to generate some headlines. I see some headlines. Former U.S. Governor bashes one of the candidates. It got to the point, apparently, the U.S. government on Monday, the embassy, actually, I guess it was on Sunday, put out a statement distancing the U.S. government from any comments you made supporting your friend, Dr. Rowley. Did you expect that there would be essentially a bit of controversy by your appearance and your support for Dr. Rowley?
I didn't generate that kind of reaction. I think it's commonly known that when an American citizen goes to another country, they have a right to say what they want to say, as presumably they have a right to say it here. The embassy, did release that statement, which is common knowledge. In other words, the United States government shouldn't be participating, for goodness sakes, in any kind of election. but its citizens might. But it was curious that they felt the need, but there was such a reaction to my appearance that I guess they felt they had to.
Well, and one of the Caribbean publications, Caribbean News Now, says there's a bipartisan backlash because of your appearance. Is that, you think that's accurate, or you think they're exaggerating on the reaction?
I think that each party, in addition, as I was saying, it's part of the culture, each party has communications outfits that write everything from their point of view. So this is clearly the sitting government's policy, and I don't know any bipartisan backlash or any of that. I'm glad to see that I could generate that much attention, and when my candidate wins, I hope the paper still is in circulation.
Here's a question. Did you pay for your trip, or did Keith Rowley and his campaign pay for your trip over the weekend to Trinidad?
My trip was paid for by an individual who sponsored me.
A supporter of Keith Rowley?
Yeah, and but the foreign is very interesting. They have a much different system than they have in the United States. Foreign money is welcomed, and the local money is capped, which is very curious.
Do you think that's a good thing, or is that a dangerous thing?
It's probably well. Look, it's their system, and this is a system that they've all set up. So I don't want to criticize their system, not knowing that much about it, but it is different than ours.
I mean, you're not calling for that system to be adopted in New York or the U.S.
No, although sometimes it's starting to feel like it's already here.
It may be. By the way, I noted with interest you preferred not to identify the person, the sponsor who paid for the trip.
No. In other words, that's you could. It's well within their rules, so I didn't see any reason to mention the person's name.
One other thing that raised some eyebrows, and I know you wanted to address, that same news website that I referenced, Caribbean News Now, had a story that said, referring to you, former New York governor claims hitherto unknown Trinidad ancestry, and it said, suggested that perhaps your story about your background has changed. Now, set the record straight, because people have said that what was reported was factually incorrect. What is the truth, and in terms of how that story came out to make it sound as though you were, shall we say, claiming Trinidad heritage when in fact you never have when you've been in New York. What is the truth?
Well, the truth is very easy to discern. This speech, and this is why it got so much attention, was televised nationally all through Trinidad and viewed all over the world. So, Bob, we're not talking about some comments that were made in a room and then it's he said, she said. The video of the speech is readily accessible. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, there's there's no black and white. There's no gray area here. This is black and white. I'm now going to read to you how I began the speech. I said, I was not born in Trinidad, but I have relatives here. When I said I have relatives here, there was a big applause. And I do have relatives there. So my grandfather, who was born in 1893, I'd never thought we'd ever get to when my grandfather was born, had a brother whose name is Maximilian Paterson, born in 1990. When he was 50 years old, 1890. When he was 50 years old in 1950, he had a son whose name is Ian Paterson. He is my relative. He's lived in Trinidad his whole life. I spoke to him over the weekend while I was there. I also spoke to Barbara and Stephen Malin Smith, who are my relatives from there. My grandparents, my grandfather left Trinidad in 1917. There were 6 siblings. 2 stayed in Trinidad, 2 moved to the United States, to New York, and 2 moved to Trinidad. So I've had this Trinidad family that I've known about for my entire life. In other words, I've interacted with them, and so I said, I have relatives in Trinidad. I never said anything else about my ancestry, and this is what I was saying. When you have media outlets that are working in a campaign, they will take the video and say it didn't happen, assuming that nobody can correct it, but it's now corrected. And anyone can see the video, and anyone can see it. The problem, as I see it in journalism now, is that American journalists will take anything they read and just write it down as if it's fact. And that's
so basically a bunch of stenographers.
Listen, remember in high school, Bob, there were these people, you always knew who they were. Anything they heard, they repeated. You know?
Yes.
You know, the teachers were making out in a bathroom. Oh, really? You know, and then by the end of the day, it's like fact, and the principal has to get involved. You know, and I think it's, in politics, the people that we have who just repeat the party line over and over again, we have a name for them. It's called hacks. So this is another case of hack journalism. And you know, in the case of Liz Benjamin, who repeated this story, she's not a bad person. I don't think she's out to be like the Caribbean Life or something like that. It's just that there's a level of responsibility that she doesn't seem to be able to achieve, because this happens with her. A couple of years ago when I was on WOR, she said that I had said that President Obama got away with being born in Africa, which was not what I said. I played the tape. We never heard, you know, from her again. But the point is that I think we've just got to demand, particularly in this day of people write things on the internet, then they wind up in a credible newspaper, and from otherwise credible journalists, there's just got to be more care taken in presenting these stories.
Well, Governor Paterson, as you know, the way journalism is practiced in the United States and around the world in 2015 is vastly different than it was, say, only 5, 10, 20 years ago, with essentially a 24/7 news cycle. And it's true, if somebody links to a story that they've seen, whether it's in another state or another country, it winds up getting traction on Twitter and Facebook and all sorts of social media. So before you know it, one story that may in fact be completely fallacious is being spread around as though it's the gospel truth.
You know, if people didn't like that I went and helped this candidate, that's one thing. If they don't agree with the candidate and want to vote for someone else, that's another thing. But I would never have said my family was from Trinidad unless it was true, you know, and I never said it. So, you know, it's, and the other thing is, it is so obvious that this Caribbean News Now or whatever it is are on the other side, particularly when you read that, and you read the other things that they wrote about the other former elected official that came with me. It's clear they're out to smear him. They're out to smear anybody who is challenging the work of their government. So when looking at it as a journalist, you've got to realize this is a tainted story. It could or could not be true, but if you're going to pen it under your name, you're going to have to do a little more research than that. But, you know, some people do it. I mean, some of the journalists...
Well, do you want an apology or do you want a correction? What do you want?
Listen, I'm not going to get one. That would be like Deepak Chopra's theory of duality. There are too many people in the media who, they can make these mistakes and they're never acknowledged. If I made even a slight mistake in this venue, I'd be reading about it for 2 weeks.
It's 9:46. We're talking with New York Governor David Paterson, the former governor, 55th governor of New York, and the state Democratic chairman. You still have a few more minutes? I know we had a few other things we wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure you didn't have an appointment. Don't want to adversely affect your
Actually,
schedule.
I'm having a DNA test at 5 after 10.
Another DNA test. I watched that video. I never, I guess I forgot that they had done a DNA test. I watched that interview that had been done years ago on New York Now. I guess I either missed it or forgot completely about it, that they were interested in your heritage, and that they actually did a TV interview with the results of the DNA.
Yeah, it was done with Susan Arbiter of NPR. And what was so interesting about it, Bob, is the interview aired 2 weeks before I became governor. And the interview demonstrated that I think 40% of my blood is Irish and Scottish. So when Eliot Spitzer resigns on March 12th of 2008, the theory was that we would swear me in that day, but I thought the legislature's going home. I'm going to be twisting in the wind, just standing there being inaugurated in Albany. So I said, let's push the inauguration back. Let's ask Governor Spitzer to resign effective March 17th, which was the following Monday, that the legislature would be back in Albany, and ironically, it was St. Patrick's Day. So when I was sworn in my inauguration, the first thing I point out is I took this DNA test, and I said it shows I'm 40% Irish, and so I pointed to my green tie and said, Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody, and that's how I began my term as governor.
And they called you David O. Paterson.
Yes.
For the one day. Let's turn to some U.S. politics now. We have no shortage of news around here. First off, we were excited to see Donald Trump took time out from his campaigning to show up for jury duty on Monday, and I think that was a good thing. He was able to do his civic duty and get his ticket punched. I guess he won't have to reappear for jury duty. I don't know if it's for another 3 years, so that's good. He can continue campaigning.
I thought that was spectacular. That was what a use. And knowing Donald, he probably wasn't due to be called until next June, but he wanted it moved up. But nonetheless, the way he handled it, and kind of for a very popular person right now to be reminding us of our civic duty, I thought that it went over very well.
Some people in the Republican Party have suggested Donald Trump actually has overall views. Maybe he's not expressing them this year, but based on his past views and even public pronouncements that he is more of a Democrat than a Republican. What do you think the truth is about Donald Trump, who obviously is making such a big splash?
You're putting me in this position. I'm going to now defend Donald Trump twice. But Donald Trump lives and develops where he started in New York City, which is an overwhelmingly Democratic area. When I was growing up in Nassau County, it was an overwhelmingly Republican area, and I remember when all my friends, mostly African-American community, they all went to the polls to vote for my father when he ran for lieutenant governor in 1970. They were turned away because they were registered Republicans, because you couldn't get a summer job unless you're a registered Republican in Nassau County in those days. So it's the same way in New York, and I think that Donald, like anyone else, survived in that Democratic climate. What he has said, and I think it's a fair assessment, is that over the years, he's become more conservative, and he thinks that he's conservative enough to run in the Democratic primary. And these
You mean the Republican primary?
Republican primary. Sorry, it's force of habit. But I think Donald has got 24% in the polls. He's 11% ahead of the second candidate. I think they got to stop worrying about criticizing him and start presenting a more workable, sensible, and achievable plan than he has, and then they'll have another candidate win. But they're not going to do it by just continually criticizing him. Is
Trump helping the Democratic Party at this point by shaking things up and basically sucking all the oxygen out of the room when it comes to discussing a lot of other issues that would be discussed by the other Republican candidates? Does this ultimately benefit people like Hillary Clinton and the potential chances for the Democrats looking ahead to November 2016?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think he's helping the Republican Party when he makes the statements about immigrants and the comments about John McCain, which I thought were horrible. And I thought too many people, look, it's fine that you agree with Donald Trump, but there are, if you know anything about military, if you've ever read anything about military procedure, there are soldiers who literally have defended this country but were sent to die. In other words, there were soldiers who were sent, and they knew only a reasonable percentage of them were coming back. So for Donald Trump to get up and say, he got caught, I like the people that didn't get caught, well then, Donald, you really disrespected the whole military of this country, because a number of people go to war knowing they're either going to get caught or killed. That's the reality of it. And I thought it was one of the most malignant statements I've ever heard. But if he can stay away from making those statements, and even though his comments are somewhat cursory and they're almost pedestrian, we have to do something about immigration. I've been saying it for years. I'm the first one to say it. Well, what are we going to do? Other than building the wall in front of Mexico, what are we going to do? And remember, a lot of Republicans, entrepreneurs, have recognized that there are people outside this country who will come in and do jobs that for some reason right now Americans will walk away from. Americans will be unemployed before they take these jobs. And they very quietly know they would have a lot of problem in the agricultural industries, landscaping, long, hard hours of work that they can't find someone else to do. So it's a very complicated subject. And I think some of the other candidates who may not even have the same point of view that I do have thought it out. I don't think Donald has.
What about Mr. Trump's comments regarding Megyn Kelly?
Again, I thought he unnecessarily picked on a reporter who, pardon me, is asking the questions that any reporter would have asked. And certainly an inference could be drawn that he picked a woman reporter to try to fulfill that notion that an aggressive woman is still in some ways mistreated by other women and men.
Speaking with New York's 55th Governor David Paterson, chairman of the New York State Democratic Committee, what about Hillary Clinton? Things seem to be heating up, and they are heating up. There's an FBI investigation regarding emails and the personal server. At the moment, things are not looking particularly good with respect to that investigation and how it could affect Hillary Clinton's possibility of getting the Democratic nomination.
I think it demonstrates a new era in American politics. Hillary Clinton was the presumptive favorite to win the nomination in 2008, and also again here in 2016. And I think what's happened now with the 24-hour news cycle that you referred to earlier, Bob, and the continuing sort of desire to tear candidates down and to have some kind of real struggle for the nomination, not that it doesn't just get bequeathed to someone. Because of that, I think it is very, very difficult to be a front runner. Hillary Clinton, other than probably a gaffe about saying that she was broke when she and the president left office in 2000 and using just her personal emails, which is being addressed right now, hasn't really said very much, and yet there's it is a very difficult time for her, and I think it may be more reflective of the fact that there isn't a contingent of Democrats really seeking the nomination. And in a way, this could be a blessing in disguise, because had Hillary won the nomination in 2008, and she came close, she had the overwhelming number of primary votes. She lost the nomination in the caucuses, where President Obama's team just totally dominated that process. If she wins now with some others in the field, it might be better than ushered through the process without an opponent. Now, this is always what politicians have wanted, no opponent. But actually what we're starting to see is the candidate that wins the dogfight in the primary has a much better opportunity unless the candidate is the sitting president.
What about the possibility that either Vice President Joe Biden or maybe the former Vice President Al Gore would get into the race? Do you see that happening?
I would think that Biden, as vice president, probably would like to have run, probably thought that he didn't have a chance since everybody seemed happy enough that Hillary was running. I don't see former Vice President Gore. I mean, the last time he ran for president was 16 years ago. It just makes me wonder when we're going to get Michael Dukakis involved. He ran for president in 1988. Maybe rather than, for those who are thinking about it, rather than going back in history, maybe we'll see, if it gets any more serious, a sitting governor or U.S. senator or someone with some prestige who might want to get into this race that might have fresher ideas.
Such as?
Well, I'm busy right now. I'm working in Trinidad, so I'm out of the picture.
So you're not going to be involved. But if things do get worse for Hillary Clinton, and there's certainly that possibility with the email investigation or some other investigations that move forward in the weeks and months ahead, do you think at that point some people in the Democratic Party would really be calling on Joe Biden to give serious consideration to becoming a candidate?
Well, it depends on how far the investigation goes. I think that Secretary Clinton has made it clear that she realizes now she shouldn't have done this. And, I think a real basic element, if you were actually trying to say there was a crime, is intent. But if any of the information were of a high enough value to the government that it, that it was inadvertently publicized, I just don't know what the rules about all of that are.
Do you think she's in big trouble today?
No, I don't. However, what I would say is, if it came to that, obviously there would be a discussion about other people getting into the race. But I think this is a situation where what she said, I think, is true, that she did not accept or leak any classified documents. I think she should not have done that on a personal email, and she shouldn't have done it on a government email. So she already was the Secretary of State. She knew the rules. I think that I don't think this is going anywhere at all, to be honest with you.
David Paterson, New York's 55th governor and the chairman of the New York State Democratic Committee. Governor Paterson, always a pleasure.
Well, great to talk to you, Bob.
Have a great day. We'll be in touch. We'll have you back on in the next few weeks, if you don't mind.
Sure thing.